Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Karyn Glemaud with me today. Karyn is an author who published her first book in November of this year, entitled Mommy's New Friend. Her book tells the story of Max, a school age boy whose special bond with his mom is challenged when he meets a new friend slash partner. Karyn is also a survivor of rape and domestic violence and will speak about that experience too. Karyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Anna.
Of course, thankful to have you. So, take us back to the beginning, where you grew up, your family situation, and what type of kid you were.
Well, I was born and raised in Dorchester, a town in Boston. Um, and my parents are both from Haiti. They were both immigrants from Haiti. And I was a first generation Haitian American. I was the second of three children, but my mother was a single mom. So I grew up with my mother and grandmother in the house, as well as my two siblings. As a middle child, I think I was lucky to kind of have an older sister to kind of go through the struggles for it that allowed me to get away with a lot more. So, um, but yeah, my mother was very strict in terms of like religion. She was a strict Catholic for some time and then became Seventh Day Adventist. And um, she was just a hard worker. Worked two jobs for as long as I could remember. Really instilled Christianity and the belief of God, almost to a fault. Um, I grew up going to Catholic schools pretty much all my my whole elementary life was in Catholic school in Dorchester. Um, and I think also what worked in my favor is that the school I went to was predominantly Haitian American or Haitian kids. So at a time where Boston, I always heard like kids were getting teased for being Haitian. It was not cool to be Haitian. In my school, we were predominantly Haitian, so it was actually cool to be Haitian because we got to talk Creole and to each
Yeah,
other
yeah.
and talk bad about the teachers that were all white. um, but growing up in Dorchester was really great. I think it taught me a lot. Like there was some diversity, but kind of going back to what I said about my mom being very strict and religious, I really went through a very strong rebellious phase. And that it's a combination of that, not feeling like I could talk to my mother about what I was feeling and going through. And then um, I think maybe that sparked also with this big secret that I had been raped. And um, I was 13 at the time. I was in my eighth grade. And I, the funny thing is, so like I said, I have an older sister who's in high school. And I was so excited because she had invited me and my best friend to a high school party. And that's where I met a young man. And he, I think he was part of like the DJ crew. And I was just excited. This was the first time I'm like experiencing like a relationship. I've just kind of came into my womanhood. I'm starting to learn about, or being attracted to the opposite sex.
Yeah,
And it was exciting, right?
yeah.
So just growing up there, I think going into that scene, just being so naive and so excited, I met this person and I was afraid to tell him my real age. So being I'm very tall, as you know, Arnav. I'm 6 feet, and I was always pretty much taller than everyone in my class from since like fourth grade. So um, I'd like to believe I got away with the idea that I was 16 because I figured he's in high school. He must be in high school, so he must think I'm in high school.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's where I met my quote unquote first boyfriend.
Okay. Before we get into that, you know, you mentioned that you grew up in a single mother in a single parent household.
Yes,
At what age were you self-aware of that? Do you remember?
I do remember. I remember being 5 and seeing my mother and my stepfather have a huge fight and him leave and never come back. So
Yeah.
I remember the exact moment. I remember seeing him like push her and he walks out, and then that was the end of that relationship. And from that point on, I never saw my mother with anyone again till
Wh-
much older.
what that's a very traumatic experience at 5 years old. What do you like? How, especially now, you know, as an older adult, how do you think that shaped your childhood and maybe even into your early teens? And was, you know, w- just because, I mean, that, there's so much there with
That
that
is kind of heavy.
experience.
Now, I never really thought about it.
Okay.
I remember again. It's just one of the memories I have. And although my stepfather was very active in our lives, I grew up calling him dad because my real dad wasn't someone I had a relationship with growing up. So I was much closer to my stepdad. He's my younger brother's father, and he was very present. So even though that relationship had ended, we saw each other almost every weekend. Um, and I remember when he got married again and had more children. Um, we just always kind of stayed in each other's lives, and he did a pretty great job when I was young in being there. But I guess that might have been the first time I felt like I couldn't trust,
Yeah.
relationships. That was the first example of like relationships fail. And it was the example I grew up with as terms of needing to be a strong woman, being independent, and figuring out things for yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, like my mother just was never the type of person who asked for help. She always was helping everyone, helping her friends in the community, helping family members. Um, but she never seemed to ask. She never felt comfortable asking. And I know that that's something I struggled with growing up,
Yeah.
is being able to ask.
Yep. You also mentioned, growing up in a religious household. How has that, transformed to who you are today? Is, you know, I'm not sure if you are religious or, and I guess what, because that's also another tough thing, right? Your parents are kind of like your sort of your role models, and if you don't necessarily buy into, what their beliefs are, that can be tough as a kid to try to be independent.
Oh man, I think that was another huge factor that shaped me. Today, I want to say that I don't have one religion. I'm non-denominational, but I do have spirit. I do believe in spirituality. I believe that there are things greater than us. That there is. I do pray, and I do, um, recognize the universe. But that what my mother has taught me is very far from who I am now. Um, and bless her heart, I know she had all the best intentions, but one thing I didn't want to be like with my mom, like my mother was, is like have this sort of blind faith. And I was in sixth grade when my mother, and I'm in sixth grade, I'm in a Catholic school. I'm used to going to church every Sunday when my mother decided to become Seventh-day Adventist. And that meant going to church now on Saturdays instead. And for the first time, she showed me that you can actually question religion. I think if we had continued as we were, I probably would have been a different person. But when she changed religions and then had us, I guess, as a part of to try to get us on board, she had us do Bible study with the Seventh Day Adventist Church, to kind of prove to us why she made the switch and why she thought it was important for us to make the switch too. I think for someone my age, around 12, all I saw was that, oh, wait, so religion isn't the law. Like, it's not like you can question this thing. You can challenge this. So you can challenge God and challenge. So it just kind of, for me, it broke down the whole institution. Like, the whole thing came crumbling down. And I questioned everything about her religion, like her new religion, everything about my former, like her former religion, Catholicism. And as I got older as well, like I began to understand that my school, St. Matthew's, was a huge victim of child pedophilia with one of our priests, and that made me even more angry and question everything more. And I've just decided to move away from that sense of blind faith, and that priests and or these leaders in the religion are like on a higher pedestal. I've removed all of that notion. I believe we're all individuals, and we all have, we all have to be held accountable for our actions, and that no one should be excused for any for any title or hierarchical reasons. Um, and that amount of power can be very dangerous as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah. You also mentioned you grew up with your grandmother. I'm curious. That's probably an experience as time goes forward that most kids are not going to have. As you look back on that, were there benefits? And I'm sure there were some struggles with that. You know, her being of an older generation and probably having different values.
my grandmother, when we talk about trauma, she's definitely has seen and felt some. And um, so I don't have the warm, fuzzy stories that I feel like I heard about other grandmothers. My grandmother was very tough. She was tough on the exterior. Um, and she only showed love in her service to our family, to me and my siblings. So she cooked and cleaned, and she was very protective about who she let into our house. Like, I'm telling you, like the first time she meets you, she comes off very rude because she's trying to figure out your energy. And then she'll make her decision. And if you made the cut, she's nice to you. She'll smile. She'll greet you. If you didn't make the cut, she's very blunt and like, nope. And she had this thing about her, like when you, because in the Haitian culture, you kiss your elders on the cheek as a sign of respect. And she would only let very few people kiss her on her cheek. She would always give your hand. Um, I only realized like when she was gone, the magnitude of her love. Um, to understand her love language came later on in life as well. I used to always think like, man, she's so mean, she's so rude.
Yeah.
She wasn't like nasty to us. She took care of us, but she just wasn't that like warm baked cookies and cuddle type of grandma that I was used to seeing like on TV. Um, and again, as I got to understand her life and the things that she had experienced, like I witnessed her lose two children, um, and that was traumatic for her. And she's also dealt with rape, and um, she just dealt with a lot. She was mulatto. Her mother was white, and her father was black. Um, and this is in Haiti. So colorism was a very big thing, and I think that also played some effects on him because if you're light skinned, you get, in some ways you get privileged, but in other ways you get targeted.
Yeah.
So that was my grandmother, but I really feel her spirit with me still. Um, I use her name as my moniker when I write, Elga Dor. That was her name. My middle name is Elga.
Mm.
So I'm very fond of her spirit.
Yeah.
Like I still feel like she's very much here with me.
I did not know that. I've seen that.
Yeah, you see
I've seen
everywhere you go.
that.
If you see
Yeah.
Facebook,
Yeah.
Instagram, it's El Gador.
Yeah.
That was my grandmother's name, and in
Yeah.
fact, I got her signature um, tattooed on my arm as a reminder every
Yeah.
day that she's with me.
Yeah. Your Haitian background, how relevant was it to your childhood, to who you are today, and how does it play a role in your life?
Being Haitian is everything to me. Um, so again, because my grandmother grew up with us, she never spoke English. She only spoke Creole. So that, luckily for me, that helped me keep my native, keep the tongue, keep the Creole language in our house alive. Because for my mother, I think in trying to fit into society here in America, she spoke English with us for the most part. I don't know if it was her way of practicing. But the only time she would speak to us in Creole is when we were in trouble.
Yeah.
So my grandmother was the reason why our culture kind of remained. And it was almost as if like behind closed doors, and even on our street, we were not, there was only my house and the house next door were Haitian. Everyone else was American. And I remember even being young when we used to get teased and picked on our way home from school. But again, my school itself was a safe haven, and being Haitian was celebrated. Being home and with my family, being Haitian was celebrated. We ate the food, we listened to the music. And then as I got older, I just never, I would hear from my cousins their experiences of trying to like hide their Haitian like culture. For me, as I got older, I was like, especially because of my appearance, Haitians and otherwise alike would always say, "Oh, I didn't know you were Haitian." To me, it was like a prideful surprise, kind of, because I don't look like the typical Haitian. I'm not very dark skinned. I carry a lot of, I think, evidence of my grandmother's, you know, mixed background, even more so than my siblings. I'm lighter than my siblings are. My siblings resemble more of what is quote unquote Haitian than I do. So it's always been something I'm proud of. I still celebrate it today. I love to tell people I am Haitian Bostonian.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm very proud to be born in Boston, and I'm proud to be of Haitian descent. It's my blood.
Yeah.
It's everything. It's my baseline.
Yeah. So you talked about a little bit at the beginning. Um, I guess as we get into it, let's maybe tell the audience that what we talk about might be some trigger warnings to anybody that has faced, um, you know, been raped or has faced domestic violence issues. So if um, this is a part you need to skip over, feel free to. But you started talking about it a little bit. You were 13, going to a high school party, and then do you want to take it over from there?
Sure. Again, this is for those who can't listen to this, definitely skip through it. But I encourage you, if you have had this experience, to um, draw strength from the strength I find in my story. Um, you know, owning this, it took a long time, and I'll walk you through that process before I even faced it myself and have owned it. But I was 13, and like I said, I went to this high school party. I was really excited. I went with my best friend, um, and it was my sister's high school. and we met. My best friend and I met uh, two guys. They were friends as well, so we were even like more excited, like, yay, you're best friends and we're best friends. And we both, so my girlfriend and I both decided we were going to lie about our age. And I think we both said we were 16, and they were 19 and 18. And it really just started off as like any relationship would start, right? Like you exchange phone numbers, you have a few phone calls, and then me and my girlfriend are like in school and passing notes. I remember even like being scared that I would be discovered on by, while I'm walking to school. He may see me in my uniform going to my elementary school.
Yeah.
So I would like change, put on like civilian clothes to walk home.
Yeah.
But we talked on the phone many times um, before I finally, decided to go and meet with him. And so it just felt like the typical, he's courting. I'm like, we're getting to know each other, we're chatting on the phone, and everything was great. And it felt like me and my best friend were kind of going at the same pace with our guys, right? So it was even more exciting. So when I don't even remember the first time I hung out with him. I don't even remember the second time or how many times exactly. I just remember the incident and then the time right before the incident, because there's something that happened in the incident right before, before the incident, that stuck out to me, and it was something I held on to, um, which I think was the reason I blamed myself. So in the incident before, or before the time of the incident, I remember I probably lied to my mom and told him I was going to my best friend's house, but I went to his house, and we were making out. We probably talked about making out, but again, I was Catholic. I grew up Catholic, and I knew I wanted to save myself until I was married. So we were making out, and he kept trying to push me to go further. And I I kept saying like, no, I'm really not ready. I'm no, because in my mind it was already said and done. Like, I'm a Catholic girl. I'm not gonna do anything until I'm married. So I remember him pushing and pressuring and pressuring. And at one point I felt like he wasn't going to stop, and somewhere out of me, like I surprised myself. I heard myself call for my mom, and he stopped. Like, what? And I like, did that come out of me? I was so shocked. Like, what just happened? And he stopped. And I hurried up and got dressed, and I said, I'm sorry, like, I'm just not ready to do all that. So I'm going to leave. And so I left, and I felt a little like, but in true, like, we're in a relationship fashion, I think, I chucked it up to like, oh well. I think in some ways I was more embarrassed the fact that I called out for my mom, that I didn't want to bring attention to the whole situation. And I just figured we'd continue as regular boyfriend and girlfriend. So then the next time that I came over again, he convinced me. I thought we were still, I figured we're still in a relationship. So I went back again. And this time he didn't stop. And I remember saying no, and I remember crying. I remember tears coming down my face. And it felt like, I think it probably all lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. Like, and I remember the smell of his mouth, the taste of his mouth. It's so weird, the things I remember. I think his mom was even in the house at the time, and we were in his room. And I remember leaving there feeling so disgusted and disappointed. And on my bus ride home, all I kept thinking is like, this is my fault. I shouldn't have lied about my age. I shouldn't have went back after the last incident. And I can't tell my mom. I can't tell anybody. Like, I'm supposed to be Catholic. I'm supposed to save myself until I'm married. Everyone's going to think I'm a whore, or, like all this shame came at me. And for whatever reason, after that incident, I couldn't even stand to talk to him really. Like, I remember him trying to call me and contact me. And I think he was trying to like woo me like he did last time, but it wasn't working for me. There was just this complete disconnect, and I was closed down and I was shut down. And I don't know that I was mad at him as much as I was mad at myself.
Why?
And
Why are you mad at yourself?
again, for all those reasons, again, I'm 13. I think the way that I'm processing it, it's like, again, why did I have to lie and say I was six? Like, I did lie and say I was 16 when I was 13. So maybe I deserve that for lying. Maybe I deserve that for going back after last time, it was clear that he probably would have done this. Maybe I was teasing him too much. Maybe I shouldn't have like allowed us to make out this far, this much. And my mom would kill me being religious. And oh my God, I lied and said I was going to my friend's house when I was at a boy's house. So all of these reasons I felt were the blame was pointing back at me. Like, I put myself in this situation. I took full responsibility for this. And that's the only way I knew that's the only sense I could make out of it. I had never heard of like, at that point, there was no Me Too movement. There was no one to kind of tell you that no means no. When you say no, that someone's supposed to just stop. And it wasn't even until I was maybe 16 years old for real that I started to even realize and accept that, oh my God, I was raped. I would have never even put it in my mind that it was a rape.
Yeah.
At that point, it was far from my mind. And even it felt like almost like when I tried to even think that maybe that's what it was, I felt like that was no, 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 I can't say that bad thing about this guy.
Yeah.
Right? Because I
Yeah.
guess in my mind, I figured like a rapist had to like look a certain way, be a certain person. And I couldn't reconcile, like, this was my boyfriend and he said he loved me. So how could he be a rapist?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Just to digest some of that. So, first question, when you are saying no to him in that moment, so not that this is important, but it like physically he was bigger than you?
he pinned me down.
Yeah. And
I
when you're
don't know that I don't know, I didn't even know that I knew to fight in that. Like, I just didn't know. I wasn't expecting this.
yeah.
And I thought that I made it clear from the last time that I wasn't going to go all the way. So when someone proceeds anyways, you're kind of stunned. It's almost like I've never been robbed, but it's like, you have all these ideas like, if I ever get robbed, I'm going to punch the
Yeah.
guy, I'm going to just kick him in, but then when you're faced in it, you kind of like
The shock
freeze.
value. Yeah.
Right. And I just remember crying, laying there crying and saying no over and over again.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And as you said, I think that the misconception with society is, and not misconception, but a lot of us have in our minds that rapists are always these crazy people who are hiding behind an alley or something like
right,
that.
right,
And I was doing some research, and many studies show like 70% of sexual assault incidences are with people the victim actually knows. You know, whether that's a friend, a family member, a boyfriend, a friend's friend. And I guess, I mean, I don't know.
It's a staggering
Yeah,
number, a
yeah,
staggering percentage, and it makes all the sense to me now.
yeah,
But as a 13-year-old, I felt I would have probably not believed that statistic either,
yeah,
right? I had it in my mind it was a guy who coming from an alley, that like someone who didn't know you, someone who doesn't tell you they love you, someone who loves you would never rape you.
yeah.
Um, and again, I feel like I grew up in a time when it was understood, like, if a girl, like, it was very quick and easy to call a girl a hoe, and it was never the guy's fault. And I knew very early on that in this instance, it probably would be blamed on me somehow. And for that reason, I never told anyone what happened. I think
Ha-
I might have told my best friend. And if I told her, I probably made it sound like I wanted to, not that I was forced and that I didn't want this to happen. That's what I imagine. I have to
yeah,
back with her and ask her, because she's still, we're still very close friends now.
yeah.
But
That ability to not see him again, that's, incredible on your part as a 13-year-old, because I think a lot of people don't do that,
yeah,
especially
I think I just,
when
yeah, I
it's a
think I went into
boyfriend.
defense,
Yeah.
just, I don't know. I think I just froze up and I didn't know how to reconcile it. So I just, the best thing for me. But funny thing is, too, I think he also knew he had done something.
Wrong.
Yeah, because I don't feel like he pushed too hard. So,
Yeah. Um,
um,
how was, you talked about not telling anyone. What was holding on to that like?
I think that changed me. I think that really affected me when I think about, um, and it's funny, I'm reflecting on it now as an adult. I don't think I've ever had this depth of a conversation or reflection on it too. So bear with me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, if I had to name it now as an adult and knowing what I know, I think I did go through some depression. And I remember even almost feeling like I wasn't in control anymore. And I remember feeling like wanting to take my power back and thinking like I should go sleep with another guy, just and decide to do it,
Mm,
just so I can feel like I made the decision and it wasn't
mm.
forced.
Yeah.
So this feeling of like maybe wanting to be promiscuous came about. I didn't really act it out, but I remember feeling that whatever, they're going to take it anyways. So, um, but
Let
I
me
can
decide.
definitely, yeah, but I can definitely say throughout my sexual life after that, there were points where I wanted to say no, but I felt like I couldn't. Like there were some instances where I didn't necessarily want to sleep with someone, but I didn't want to, I was afraid that if I said no, that they wouldn't stop. There were some instances like that where I probably should have just said no and walked away, but I was too
Traumatized.
traumatized
Yeah.
from that experience. So,
Yeah.
um,
the closeness of him living near you, that's tough. Did
Yeah,
you
he
did
was
you
like
end
a
up
short bus ride away.
yeah, did you end up like running
Oh,
into him and
oh my God. I
yeah.
know the one time I almost ran into him. I'll never forget it. And this is again, I can say this now, but I think then it didn't very much click for me. I remember because I used to take a bus to school because when I was in high school, I went to the John D. O'Brien, and I would take a bus on Blue Hill, and it would. And the funny thing is, I would ride past his house all the time because to take my bus to go to school, it would pass his house every time, and every time I would approach the bus stop, I would get a little nervous, like, oh my God, what if he appears? And one time he did. One time, I remember I'm sitting at the back of the bus and the back door opens and he was about to get on. But for whatever reason, I think maybe he decided to go on the next bus. And my heart was beating out of my chest. I couldn't believe the way my body reacted to just that potential of him seeing me. Like I saw him, but I don't think he saw me. And he ended up maybe taking a bus behind, that was right behind. And I'm telling you, like I literally shook. It
Yeah.
shook me to my core. And I'm like, I don't want to have to say hi to him. And even at that point, I still don't think I fully knew that it was a rape, right? I still didn't reconcile that fully. The point when I did, however, was when I was in I would say my sophomore year in high school. I became a peer leader. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term.
No, no.
Okay, so a peer leader is, there was a great group of I don't, this one particularly was through the Greater Boston Youth Council. And what they did was train teenagers like ourselves, like my age, like around the time 15, 16, 17. They would train us on rape, drug use, all the peer pressures, all of that. They would train us to talk to other kids our age because they felt like the message would hit better if it came from someone, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we would, it was an amazing idea. And it was an amazing experience because here we were addressing traumas, addressing, rape, all these things that teenagers go through with other, so, and then we would go to school, high schools or other youth programs like Boys and Girls Clubs and have like workshops and talk about date rape and peer pressure and why we should say no to drugs. And here I was, a leader, teaching other kids, other people my age, no means no. And it is like, oh my God, it made me like reflect on my own experience and realize like, no, he was not supposed to do that. I said no. And he was not supposed to do that. He raped me. I remember like when the aha moment
Yeah.
happened. And I felt sorry for myself, like kind of like, oh my God, Karyn, you were beating yourself up this whole time and you didn't have to. So it was also like a sense of freedom because I finally got to let go of that guilt and shame
Yeah.
and put the onus on him. So I was about 16 or 17 at that time, about 3, 4 years later.
Yeah. Um obviously schools do their sort of education as you talked about consent and things like that. On a more practical level, what advice do you have for, and obviously assaults go both genders, but what advice do you have for the females out there, especially at that age where the high school boys seem so cool, like a status symbol and things of that nature, um, just based on your experience?
It's funny because as a mother of four boys, I can't help but to think both sexes.
Yeah.
And also, when I grew up to understand the pedophilia that was happening in my own elementary school to the young boys in my class, I can't just speak to the women. I think this goes for both. I feel very protective of all sexes because anyone can be a victim. Um, going going into, I mean, I would hope right now that the message is getting bigger and louder. You know, the importance to respect when people say no. Like I teach my kids that. Um, but to also empower yourself to try to remove yourself as much as possible, you know. And like you said, unfortunately a lot of these instances happen with people we know, and we can't often reconcile either disobeying an adult family member or someone that has a, you know, like stature in your family, like a priest. How do you say no to that person and walk away from that person? um, but even as someone in a dating too, like you see that this person loves you, you have feelings for them, you love them too. I would implore you to try to just take the time, try to take time and understand them and know them and have these conversations, especially in a relationship, right? Have these conversations about where you stand right now. Like where do you stand in terms of your sexual journey? Can you talk about, like, I haven't done it and I don't know that I'm ready to do it yet, or I want to wait, or maybe I have done it, but I also, maybe I don't want to, I want to make this one special, or I want to take my time. It could be a multitude of things, but I try to be, I think communication is key in some ways. Don't just, I definitely think oh sorry, I'm kind of going back to, like, yeah, you see this cool person and you think like it's almost an honor that they're interested in you and that they're giving you this
Yeah.
attention,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You're just
Yeah.
like, oh my God.
Adolescent kids. Yeah. That's the
So
mindset.
when they're now telling you that they want to go all the way, it's kind of hard to say no, because then you're like, damn, is that going to make them not like me anymore? Um, I think the important thing is to figure out yourself, where you stand and what, because I'd like to believe, at least I would have imagined when I was going to go and do it for the first time, that I was going in
Wanting to.
wanting and completely understanding that, like, so I think it needs to be a conversation with yourself. What's your comfort level? Like, are you ready to deal with the consequences of your actions? Like, are you going to feel bad about it after? Are you, you know, or how are you protecting yourself and using contraception and making sure that this doesn't result in having a baby and you're playing it safe? Like, having that conversation with yourself, knowing, standing firm in what you want to do, and then having that conversation if you have a partner, and making sure that that's clear and understood, um, and maybe plan for it. I know that sounds kind of corny, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes we all like the spontaneous things, but I think for a young adolescent, it's important to create a very safe space, and to also, and to know this too, and I say this with strength, like, even this, let's say you plan to do this, if in the moment you feel a little hesitant, you need to be able to voice that, and you need to stop. You should feel fine with saying, you know what, I changed my mind. It's never too late to change your mind. And if anyone who really cares and loves you and respects you, they will stop, and they will respect you.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of interested in this. Might be a tough question, but especially from the parenting perspective now that you have, is there an aspect of parenting that we should be telling our kids to tell us? In other words, if you put yourself in your mom's shoes,
Right.
would you have wanted to know?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would have wanted to know. I do still question, because I don't think I've ever even had this conversation with my mom now that I think about it. I do question if, and this is where religion for me, sometimes I felt like religion created a wedge between my mom and I in some ways. I would, I feel like maybe she would have still judged me, but because of what I knew, what I experienced, and I could be wrong. This is just my assumption based on how she was oftentimes with the religion thing. I could be wrong, but I feel like I've worked really hard to be everything opposite of
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
So with my kids, I've always tried to put the awkward conversations on the table. So I have two 17-year-olds right now, for example. So they kind of get embarrassed sometimes. They're like, Mom, I don't want to talk about that. So I don't know. I try to approach it. I try to even share some of my stories to make them, because I think that I think in general, people open up to you more when you open up to them, right? When you offer a little something, they're more willing to reciprocate. So I try to have those moments with my kids where I'm like, I talk about some experiences I've had, and so that they can learn from that. But it's very, 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 it's been from very early on. I've told them, please, like, even if it's your girlfriend, even if the girl thinks she wants, just please try to pay attention to their energy and their body language. Because there's some things that people have a hard time even saying.
Yeah.
Um, and I never want them to be in a situation where they make anyone feel, disrespected or taken advantage of or things like that. So,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, but on the flip side, the idea of no matter what happens, that they're able to come to you, right, and they're not like not deal with that trauma on their own, like you dealt with. You know,
Right. So I do try
it's
to, again, share my trauma.
yeah,
I talk about the relationship that I've had with my mom and how difficult it was to talk to her. And I make it very clear, like, look, I don't want you to feel like I felt about my mom. Like, I want you to know that you can always talk to me. Sometimes I'll ask some questions and try to dig and just check where they're at. And every now and then they'll surprise me and might just say, "Hey, mom, like this is what happened," or "What, I'm dating this girl," and da 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 da. Um, but I always, I know for sure my firstborn, I tell him, I've told him very flat out, like, look, if there's anything that happens to you, I want you to know that I'll have your back, and if you if you come to me, I can probably help you um, get what you need,
yeah,
in terms of resources. But I'm also a huge advocate for therapy. And I've created that space for my sons as well. So they have their therapists, and I always tell them, if there's something you can't talk to me about, like, know that that's your safe space, and you can always, I'm like, that's the place you can go and
that's
talk bad about me if you want.
no, that's great. No, that's a great move as a parent. One last question on, I guess, that we'll do on this. Healing, right? That's the toughest thing with these kinds of traumas, and especially given your age, right? You weren't like, a 25-year-old,
Yeah.
you were 13. Do you, I mean, I don't know if there are any tips, but like, for someone that may have been in a similar situation as you, maybe not the exact age or whatever, but have been raped or have been sexually assaulted, as you look back on your journey, what steps have helped you to heal? I know that you felt like at 16, you know, you looked at the situation in a different light, and that probably helped.
Yes.
Um, yeah, any advice on that end?
Again, I think definitely being a peer leader, talking to other people about rape helped me come to terms with my own experience. that was the beginning of that. But it was a journey, and I think healing is a forever process. It's not a place you just come to and arrive. It's a constant thing, because that became evident to me in my later relationships, which we'll talk about next. Is, when I got into my domestic violence relationship, um, I think there was some evidence of that trauma that still, that brought me to that place, that got me to that place. Um, and I think that even still now, there's probably some things that bubble up every now and then. Even as I'm in a committed relationship with a wonderful husband, um, there are still some times when I just feel insecure, or I question some things about decisions I've made. Um, so I think I'm on a constant journey to healing, and I'm continuing to healing. I'm more healed now than I was then. Um, but even as I talk to you right now, I'm feeling like, oh wow, like, okay, this is making me feel better about this, right? Because I haven't really felt, I don't think I've dove into this conversation as much as I've done in a while. So
Yeah.
I think getting it out is I think the more you talk about it, the more you write about it or acknowledge it, um, it, it 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 adds to the healing. But it's a constant journey.
Yeah. So now we can transition more to, your journey, setting up for the book, but of, being a single mother and things of that nature. You just mentioned it a little bit, but maybe just you want to give a synopsis of, what happened with that marriage, the domestic violence, and then becoming a single mother.
Right. I think again here it was a maturity thing. I got into that relationship when I was, I think, 21 or 22 years old. And um, again, back evidence of the trauma, I think, was that I was under the impression that I was mature and I knew everything, and I didn't. I think in some ways I got stunted at that age of 13, and in some ways I was still very immature and naive. And so when I met my ex, um, I was very, I was still young. He was a lot older than me. And he, very manipulative. Like and I never had a real impression of what love was supposed to be like. So when he wanted to see me every single day from the time he met me, I thought, oh, he really
Oh,
likes me. But now I'm like, he was
that's yeah,
possessive.
that's very unhealthy.
It was
Yeah,
unhealthy.
yeah,
And everything happened very fast. Within 3 months. No, within a month, he moved me into his place. Within 3 months, I was pregnant.
wow,
And at the same time I'm finding out I was pregnant, I found out that this guy is not nice.
yeah,
um so but I was dazzled in a lot of ways because he was, again, a lot older. He was pretty well off. So he took me on a trip to Paris, right? So that's dazzling for a 22-year-old.
yeah,
We're on our trip to Paris. I'm starting to get symptoms of being pregnant. And so I remember the first real fight we had that made me think, oh shoot, what did I get myself into? Is that I was craving McDonald's French fries. And he was so appalled that we were in France and I want to eat French fries to McDonald's. Like, oh, and he proceeded to just like degrade me. And all I wanted was just some fries. Like,
yeah,
is that serious? And um My one of my other best friends was invited on the trip, and she overheard him basically like he cursed me out for hours. Like it was became into a huge fight because I wanted French fries, and then that turned into him saying, "Oh, I don't know why you invited your friend when he invited her." It was just like all this, like it was just
Toxic energy.
nonstop toxicity.
Yeah.
So I was so embarrassed. My best friend was so offended. She ended up leaving early. I was upset, and I'm just like, what? And so it's funny, but when I came back to Boston, I knew that I wanted to be out of this relationship. I was done. But he was very manipulative, and he convinced me that, oh, having this child is what we needed. It would repair our relationship. And I remember thinking like, no. And then an incident happened. Now we know I'm pregnant, and he wanted me to drive because he had hurt his back. And so I'm driving his car, and he's barking at me the whole time about how bad I'm driving, and reaches over and hits me on my hits me as I'm driving the car.
Oh my god.
And I got out. I remember parking at Kendall Square T station,
Yeah.
getting out the car and leaving, taking the train, and just like, all right, I'm done. And from that point, I thought I was gonna have an abortion. I was gonna be done with him. But when I went to have my abortion, it was just, oh, sorry, I'm going on.
No,
Bottom line
no,
is,
no.
no, because I just feel like I know I was supposed to give like a brief synopsis, and I feel like
No,
I'm
no,
going.
no. That's fine.
But basically, what it was that I had my first doctor's appointment as a pregnant woman. But by the time I arrived to that doctor's appointment, I knew for sure I didn't want to be with this person. And I knew that this wasn't the best decision for my life at the time. And so that doctor's appointment turned into an appointment to make to schedule an abortion.
Yeah.
However, also I got on the phone, they connected me with the abortion clinic, made my appointment, and they were like, well, while you're already there, go get the ultrasound and bring that picture with you for your appointment tomorrow. I'm like, okay, cool, thinking nothing of it. But remember, I'm still on the side of we're having a baby. So as I'm laying there getting the ultrasound, the nurse, unbeknownst to her, is like, oh my God, look at his little toes. And she's so excited, not realizing, like, I guess the memo didn't get to her that I was terminating this baby.
Yeah.
So when she pointed out these things, I just was like, oh my God, I can't kill this baby. I have to. So I walked out of there and decided to keep it, to
Wow.
keep my child.
Yeah.
And that just opened a whole avenue for manipulation. And I remember saying to myself too, I never wanted to be a single mom like my mother was. I want to raise my kid with his father. And for all those reasons, I stayed.
Mm.
I ended up going back and staying with this guy, even though I knew very early on, like, this is not gonna work.
Yeah.
This is dangerous. And I went through a series of a lot of verbal abuse, being told I was getting fat when I'm pregnant.
What the okay.
Like all kinds of things, like constantly, just nothing I could do, nothing I did could be right. And I was also noticing, like, he did the typical thing where, like, drawing me away from my friends by talking bad, like, oh, that person is a bad influence. And so now I'm like shrinking from my friends, because now I'm also like, I realized the more I told my friends about what was going on, the more they were disapproving. And therefore, that meant if I'm still staying here, I'm like looking like an idiot. So that also forced me to withdraw from them. And before you know it, I was alone. I had no one to go to, and it was just horrible. It was a very bad depressive. I was very depressed during my pregnancy. I was very unhappy. And when I finally when I gave birth, there was a few incidents. Okay, again, like I had one major incident where he put his hands on me and called the cops. I called I called the
Oh.
police, and then he went outside and called the police as well and tried to like turn it on me somehow. But the story didn't add up for his side. So they arrested him, and we lived in a beautiful loft space. That was another thing. Like, our living space was amazing. I was so proud of our living space. Like, we had this amazing loft in Boston, and I had all these things on the surface that I was proud of, but inside I was dying and I felt like I was in prison. And I was also beginning to resent my child because I felt like it's because of this child I'm forced to stay in this relationship. And I was feeling very disconnected for the first few months of being a mom. And so the incident occurs, he gets arrested, and the courts are kind of encouraging me to press charges. Meanwhile, he's on the other ear, like, I can't believe you did this to me. It's your fault. How could you do this to our family? And I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was in a rock, stuck between a rock and a hard place again. Like,
Yeah.
yes, this man has done these things to me, but again, he's told me he's loved me. He's taken care of me and my kid. And by taking care of me, I mean, like, he really didn't want me to work. Like, I was exclusively like at his whim, right?
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, the thing that so basically, DSS threatened to take my child because we were in a loft, and when the incident occurred, it was all one big room. So according to the laws in Massachusetts, if the kid is in the room where the assault happened, the child was in danger. And even though he was technically like in the living room area and we were in the bedroom area, it was all one room. There was no separate rooms. It was a loft. So therefore, my son was in danger. And the prosecutors are like, basically like, if you don't prosecute him, if you don't, we're basically saying like you threatened your life, your child's life. And the only way to get around this would be to have DSS involved. So a case was opened and they were like having to like come and monitor my house every week. And one of the things I had to promise is if I'm going to stay with him is that we had to have therapy and work on preventing this from ever happening again. And he hated that. I just was like, whatever it takes to just keep my child. But it was the best decision I ever made in my life because I went to therapy and I saved myself. He never went to therapy. I saved myself. I went to therapy. I remember walking in there as a zombie and the therapist putting me on antidepressants immediately. And slowly and surely, she helped me like unravel this web of manipulation that I was stuck in. And I also, even at one point, there was another incident where he attacked me in the car. This is after my son was born. And because of the DSS and stuff, I had resources. So I was able to go, and I lived in a domestic violence shelter for several months. Like I had to go in hiding and not have any contact with him, not only to protect myself, but protect other women that were in the house as well, that were trying to stay safe from their loved or their spouses or abusive spouses. And the funny thing is, even after that, I went back one more time. Right. So when you
Yeah.
hear about people like going back, and I remember even being that person who would have judged that person. And I remember looking at myself and thinking like, I can't believe I'm a lifetime story. And I was even more ashamed. But I remember, going back yet again,
Why?
he figured out, he manipulated. And the truth is this, I had, so after when I had a friend who found out that I was in the shelter, And he was so like, oh my God, Karyn, that can't be true. Like, come on, like, you don't have to go that low. Just come and stay with me. Don't stay in the shelter. And so I was like, all right, fine. And he gave me everything I need, like a car, like really took care of me, helped me, like let me move in. But then I soon discovered that this friend that was doing this a favor for me was really actually in love with me, and that he was doing it with an ulterior motive. So I remember exactly thinking to myself, like, if I'm gonna have anyone, if I'm gonna, I don't want a relationship. I keep telling him that. I remember having to tell him, like, he was, because there were times like I'd come home and find flowers in my room, and I'm like, dude, I'm
Yeah.
not in the space for any of this. Like, why are you doing this? Like, I can't. Like, please stop. And um, it just put me in this place where I was thinking, like, shit, if I'm gonna get excuse my language, if I'm going to get courted by anyone, I'd rather deal with the father of my child. Like, I don't want another
Mm.
man in my son's
Yeah.
life. Again, I was far from thinking about any blended family thing. Like, it wasn't cool for me then. So when my ex was laying it on thick and saying he's sorry and writing me letters, and I felt like, okay, I have one guy here that wants to promise me to be a good man, and then I have the father of my child who wants to promise me to be a good man. I might as well go with
Yeah.
the
Yep.
father of my child, because again, I still had this idea of like not
Doing.
tearing my family apart.
Yeah.
And I went back. But when I went back, it was different. And I remember thinking, like, sure enough, here we go again. Like, after 2 weeks of him behaving, he started to like slowly show his true self again.
Yep.
And eventually, like, the last and final incident occurred. He attacked me in front of my mother while my mother was in the house.
Yeah.
And I remember grabbing a trash bag full of my clothes and going to stay at a friend's house with my son, with my life in a trash bag. And um, I remember praying. And when I prayed that same day, I remember I put a post on Craigslist that I was looking for a place to stay, and I got an answer. And it was an older man, older white guy. I'm saying this because I just want you to like imagine the craziness or the randomness of it all.
Yeah.
An older white guy who looked like Santa Claus, and a single mom from Peru, a Peruvian single mother with 2 boys. And they're like, hey, we have an extra room. We're in Belmont. You want to come? The minute I met them, we were just like, we hit it off, and it was like the odd bunch, because here I was too. It was like, I had my big curly afro. My son had dreadlocks, this Spanish woman with her 2 kids, and this older white man. And people would look at us like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
But it was the best
Yeah.
thing. It saved me, because I think for the first time, I had a safe space. And I think that was all the difference. I think last time, because I ended up in a space where I didn't feel comfortable and safe, like it made it easier for the manipulation to make its way through. So this time I'm like, I'm good. I have a really good place. I'm in a good place. I can see how I can make this work for myself now. I can be independent. And trust me, my ex tried for 2 years, I think 2 or even 3 years, tried to reel me back in, but I was like, no, this is it. I'm good. And that was how I survived that. And then it was I was so fine with being a single mom. Like, I was settled in it, and I sat in it, and I loved it, and I was completely in control. I felt for the first time I was in control. And now I can, you know, be in charge of the destiny that I write for me and my son. And so we would go traveling every year. My son and I would always make sure too, like, I didn't want to be that single mom that was like depressed or, struggling and not doing things. I wanted to still live my adventures and do the things that I wanted to do and not feel limited or bogged down because I have a child. Like I remember even when I would date, one of the first things I would put out there is like, look, I'm a mom. If you have a problem like that, let me know right away so I can just push you to the
Don't
side.
waste my time. Yeah.
Right. Let's not waste anybody's time. So I was very strong and very confident. And this grew over obviously with time. My therapy was great. All of this time that I was going through the like back and forth, I had my therapist with me. And that was such an awesome, like, oh, that's what definitely helped me, figure it out and get through it. And
Karen, if I can, I just want to
oh,
say, your strength is incredible. But
thank you.
just I know you're going off on a different story, but the story you just said, and told, um, and even I can't even believe you transitioned into a different part of your life. Like I'm serious. Like it's, I just want to pause and say that because, um, I'm just trying to put myself in your position, and the fact that you came out of that and you didn't give up. Um, I'm not sure that I would have kept going if I was you, to be honest. So I just want to say you're incredibly strong. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know that I would have kept going to if it weren't for my son. And I remember that time in Belmont with that awesome, like odd family bunch, right? That we
Yeah.
were. Um, I remember feeling like, oh my God, the breakthrough was happening where I was like starting to really see the gift that my son was. Because I think up until then, I felt like he was like a weight. Like, what's that word? Like that ball and
Burden. Yeah.
chain, that
Yeah.
burden that kept me stuck with this bad relationship. And when I finally figured out a way to break away from it,
It's
I
freeing.
found love in him and I found strength in him. And he became my reason for everything and
Yeah.
to keep fighting and to do and to change my course completely. And the other really tough thing, like, it's first of all, thank you for acknowledging because it does take time. Like even some of my friends, they're just like, or people who meet me now and know me now and hear the story, they're like, I would have never imagined that you would have you've
Yeah.
gone through this.
Yeah. I didn't know this
You don't
about you.
seem like that person. You don't
Yeah.
seem like, and I didn't think that about myself either. And that's what took me some time to finally like, yo, you got to wake up and get out of this.
Yeah.
But the other thing that was so empowering in all of this is learning to co-parent. Because at that point in my life, I was used to like, if I had a bad experience with someone, I'll just cut you off, never talk to you again. But because he was my son's father, and I knew deep inside, like, I didn't want to come between that either. Like, I was forced to basically face this man who has hurt me for so long and rebuild a relationship with him in order to raise our child together. That that is the craziest of it
Yeah.
all. Because it could have easily been like, don't talk to me anymore or just cut you off completely. But no, to be, to have to sit there and face him and build. And when I tell you it took a lot out of me, because obviously, as the narcissist he is or was in that relationship, he didn't make it easy. He wanted to very much use my child against me to manipulate me or make me suffer because I chose to walk away from the relationship and be away from and break the chains. Like there were years of like where he was so unfair and so like, for example, like we had tried to outside of court, settle on like how he would help support my child. He was inconsistent. So it got to a point where I was like, you know what, I don't want to have this argument anymore. I'm going to go to court and I'm just put child support, set it and forget it. And he hated me for a while for that. But I think it that was part of what saved us a little bit because it's like, okay, now we don't have to have this conversation anymore. Nothing about money anymore. And even And to further prove that it wasn't out of like any malice intent, like he tried to imply it was, that I took him to court for child support. I never went back and adjusted it. Like I never went back. There were years, because at the time when I went for child support, he wasn't making money on paper. He wasn't even working. I think he was doing like DJing at the time or something. And now he's like, if I was being malicious, I would have gone back and adjusted. But I never did all of that. Like I just didn't want to have to argue anymore. I always just wanted it to be about our son. And it was a struggle. And how many years later? My son wasn't even 2 at the time when I left him for good. So 15 years now.
Yeah.
15 years now. And if you see how we are now, even if someone told me then how we would be today, I would have never believed him.
I didn't see that coming. I didn't know the end of that story, but for based off what was being said, that's quite
Imagine
incredible.
the
Yeah.
person who has hurt you the most, you having to just work through it and still raise a child with that person and
Yeah.
still have to like hold your tongue when your kid is like sitting there, because my son is a champion for his dad. He loves his dad, and I can't sit here and say nothing bad about him. I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that was, I think, the biggest feat for me. For me, that's where I find the most pride, and that we're cool today. Like I can honestly say, my son's father and I are in a very good place. We're
Wow.
good friends. Like we're cool.
Yeah.
Never. And I think there's another point to say here too. I think a lot of people look for closure, an apology. I never got that. I had to create that for myself. And that's one advice I give to people. Don't wait for anybody else to give you that freedom. You have to take that freedom yourself. Don't wait for people to give you closure. I hear this all the time. Oh my God, I didn't get closure. I didn't get to talk to them one more time. And I didn't hear them say sorry. And some people die. Some people, and then some people will just never see that. Like, I don't think my son's father will ever know the length of the trauma he brought on my life. But I didn't want to leave it up to him to end it either. I had to end that for myself. I had to reconcile that for myself. So I found closure by myself
Yeah.
in other ways. I didn't rely on him for that. And for that reason, I don't know, we're cool. We're cool.
Yeah. That's amazing.
We're cool. I still
Yeah.
talk, like, till this day. My son and I'm like, your dad is great for these things. I think you definitely should talk to your dad for these things. Like he's awesome. And even some things I've come to him for advice on business. Like he's a very, very business minded person. So I go to him for certain advices. He gets along great with my husband. I think, so it's just really been amazing to see the evolution of our relationship. So
What's the hardest part of raising a child as a single mother? I obviously there's the finances, there's probably the lack of support, in terms of not having, another person there to split, diaper time and things like that.
right.
Um, what's the hardest part?
The hardest part for me is taking time for myself and not feeling guilty about it. That was the toughest. But I knew deep down inside, and I knew from my mother. My mother sacrificed her entire life for us, for her children. And I love my mom for that. I appreciate her for that. But I also felt like she did a disservice. Um, because I just didn't want to be that person, because it shows now. Like my parents, my kids, I'm sorry, like at the point when we all got older, my mom almost felt like, and became like an empty nester. She seemed lost.
And
Like
no purpose.
her
Yeah.
whole world was us and everything for us. So working 2 jobs to make sure we never had to want for nothing. And I I knew early on I wanted to show my son the importance of living, right? And like I said, I mean, I had to make some rash and maybe not so responsible financial decisions, but I made it a point every year to go on a trip with him to another country, go on adventures, and see the world as much as we can. And he was just like my partner in everything I did. And I think in some ways too, and I remember some of my friends were cringing at that time, like, man, like you talk too much. I think there's certain things you shouldn't tell your son, but I wanted him to know and understand, especially because there was evidence that he was hearing it from other people, like at schools. And I'm like, I don't want you to hear the fake news.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, I want you to know the real, the truth. And in some ways it really, I know this now, like my son is very mature for his age. I raised him to be very mature and independent and to think outside of me. And that was the difference I wanted too. Like I felt like the way my mom raised me is like, I if it was up to her, I would always look to her for the answers. And I wanted to raise my son to be able to operate even if I'm not here. Like if I'm not here, I want you to make the best decisions for yourself. I want you to be able to evaluate a situation and make a wise decision based on, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
your ability to evaluate and check out the scene. Like I'm not always gonna be here for you.
yeah.
So
I guess as you transitioned into dating, um, do you want to talk about how you got into the current situation?
yeah. So like I said, my son and I were adventurers. Every year we travel all over the world, and um, one year I got really tired of my job. I had a cushy job at Harvard, and I just realized um, this wasn't worth the. Like I just felt like it was taking the life out of me. I wasn't happy, and I quit and decided to move to New Zealand with my son. And we were gonna go. We went and lived on 3 organic farms and helped the families with farming in exchange for room and board. And my purpose was to write a book at that time. At that point, I had already been a published author. I had written some short stories and poems and had those published. And the same publisher was interested in my thesis paper for my undergraduate degree about open marriages, and he wanted me to turn it into a book. So I'm like, okay, I have my purpose, I have my adventure, I have my son, I'm ready to go. And I left. Right before I had left, I had met someone at a party, but I knew I was leaving the country, so I was like, I don't really want new friends, but here you go. I gave him my email. We exchanged Facebook, and I went off to New Zealand and quickly realized I wasn't going to have time to do a real big book. So I pivoted to writing a children's book because I felt like it was um, like a small enough project that I can get done within that time frame that I had. And I didn't want to come home empty handed. So I came home. I wrote the first iteration of Mommy's New Friend with my son.
Yeah,
Um, and in that place where I was at that time, I had just actually ended a relationship, but I was always dating, but dating was very personal to me in terms of like I didn't really involve my son. Like in terms like as far as my son was aware, everyone was a friend. They were no different from my cousins or my best friends. And I don't think I had too many people that I was like, oh, I'm really serious about this person. So I kind of went to New Zealand with like, oh, I just got out of a relationship. My son wasn't really aware. But I was like, I can't wait for that day when I actually like meet someone and officially introduce my son to them. And what will that be like? And that's how Mommy's New Friend came to mind. I did the research while I was in New Zealand. I couldn't find any books on the topic. I found books on divorce or two, like mom and step, or like stepdad, like we're, struggling between living between two homes and things like that, but never like how does what's going to happen that moment the kid meets the new person for the first time.
Yeah.
So me do that. My son helped me kind of really bring out the kid's voice in it. So I was like, all right, you're co-author. We're going to make this happen.
Yeah.
And I was so excited. I came home with something, a done product. I had my children's book finished. And 3 months later, I'm back in Boston, and I get a message on Facebook from this person I met at the party randomly saying happy birthday. And I was like, oh, you don't hate me, because I essentially like didn't really engage with him since I left for New Zealand. And he's like, no, it's cool. I understand. I know you were leaving the country, but I'm like, well, I'm back in the States now if you want to hang out. And oh, by the way, I'm going to move to Paris at the end of the summer. Just because, again, while I was in New Zealand, I had the epiphany like, wow, I just did this crazy thing. I'm going to keep this ball rolling. And I've always wanted to live in Paris. So I came to Boston, wrapped up my life, and moved to Paris. But I gave myself some time. I wanted to give myself like at least 4 months to like work, get some money together, wrap up my life for real. And so I ended up spending the summer hanging out with this guy that I met right before I left for New Zealand. And he kind of became the one confidant I had, because all my friends and family thought I was crazy for moving to Paris. And anytime I gave them anything about the struggle I went through to like get the visas I needed and all this other stuff, they would always just be like, well, maybe you shouldn't go. If this isn't working out, maybe you shouldn't go. I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want anyone to stop me. So he became my confidant, the one person like who just wasn't judging. I would just like vent to him like, oh my God, it took like, you won't believe the visa process and da 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 da. So that then spilled into, now we're living in Paris. I'm living in Paris with my son. So naturally, he's been like my friend and I have been talking about all the process to get there. Now, when I get to Paris, I found out the job I had lined up wasn't going to work out anymore. And I didn't want to tell my friends and family that, oh shit, I might have to come home right away.
Yeah.
So he just became the person who was like, while I'm in Paris, you know everything that's going on. Like he already has been following the story. So I ended up finding a job, like everything just miraculously fell into place. And we continued our friendship throughout my time there, to the point where I would say about a month and a half into my stay in Paris, we admitted to each other that there might be bigger feelings here. I
Got
think,
some
and
feelings.
oh man, if I was still in Boston, maybe this would have been a relationship. And now for the first time, I'm actually telling my son, like, because he notices I'm on the phone with this guy all the time. And of course, because he's stateside, our time zones are a little different, 6 hours difference. So he noticed, he's like, and I'm telling my son, like, yeah, I actually really like this guy. Like, for the first time, I'm talking about having feelings for someone. And I remember even saying, like, I'm struggling with the idea of like, man, should I stay in Paris or should I, or talking. I remember telling my son about how I'm struggling with the long distance thing. Like, I don't know, like I really like him, but I really don't want to do the long distance relationship thing. And I definitely want to stay in Paris. That was my stance. So after about 4 months in Paris, my son had a school break and he wanted to come see his dad. And I'm like, okay, cool. And that's a great opportunity for me to also see my friend and to make a final decision of whether or not I'm going to continue this long distance thing or end it once and for all, because it was just getting heavy. So we get to Boston, and my son decides, I think after a couple of days, he's like, "Mama, I don't want to go back to Paris." And I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, you don't have a choice." He's like, "Actually, yeah, Dad said I can stay with him." And I'm like, what? No, you like, I was used to having him
Full
with
time.
me everywhere
Yeah.
I went. And it's like, oh my God. And then in some ways I was starting to think too, maybe, well, because it did start to get a little difficult for us in Paris as well. Um, like the job I had wasn't really enough to live by, especially because the euro was so much stronger than the dollar. So my paychecks were really like, ugh. And it was getting tough. And I did consider even like maybe for 6 months he can stay with his dad, and then I could just try to get a better position, or adjust my visa or something like. But then I also had my friend like, well, if you do come back, we can really make this thing a relationship. And so I just felt like I had two very strong reasons
Stay.
to stay. And in some ways I felt disappointed in myself. I'm like, man, I said I would be here for 8 years at least. Like,
Yeah.
I'm only 4 or 5 months in, like, really, guys. But all everything pointed to stay. And I made the decision, and I went back to Paris, wrapped up everything, moved out, and came back home. And um, my son stayed with his dad for a few months while I got back on my feet, and I stayed with my friend who we agreed was now going to be a budding relationship. So we committed pretty much when I came back, and that's how my husband and I came to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
4 kids later.
Yeah. I guess what was so he um like what was the toughest part of that transition? Obviously, your son's now getting a stepdad, um and things of that nature. What for a blended family, what at their start, what are some of the tougher the harder transition points?
Oh man, I think the toughest part for us was that our parenting styles. So my son and I, we had our own rhythm, right? I've been with him at that point. He was maybe like 10, 11, nearly a decade. It was just the two of us, and he only had to answer to one person.
Yeah.
And I'm very much the liberal mom, the anti everything my mom was, as far as like strict Haitian religious. And here comes my husband, who was raised in Haiti with the religious background and with the strict, Haitian. So my husband came to the US late in his life, and like I think 26, 27. And so I don't think he fully understood too, like the way that the like I think he was trying to adjust to like the American parenting style mixed. I had a mix of a little Haitian, a little bit of American. So basically, my husband was more traditional, very much more traditional, very much more like church going. His parents were Catholic. So seeing the way me and my son were for him was weird. In some instances, for example, I always encouraged my son to ask why. But in Haitian culture, that's like the biggest disrespect you can do to a parent. Is like, ask, if a parent tells you to do something, you are not allowed to ask why, you just do it. And I'm like, I'm not raising my kid like that. I
Mhm.
don't want him to be a yes man. I want him to question everything. And so I remember my husband like, why does he always ask you why? That's so rude. And I'm like, no, actually, I want him too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I think was the biggest challenge. It's like the parenting style. And I remember my son being so frustrated too, because he's like, oh, because like now I'm like, all right, when you want permission to do something, I have to let me check in with Vardy, make sure we're all on the same page. And used to drive him crazy because then he's like, I already know Vardy's gonna say no. Like, can I just ask you? Because you're gonna. And then when I think my son liked to believe, especially as he got older into the teenage years, where it's like, no, I'm not gonna let you get away with all of that. Like, get out of here. But he'd love to blame my husband, like as he's an influence on me and how I used to be cool. Oh, mom, you used to be cool when it was just us, and now you're becoming like this like stickler. And I'm like, actually no, I totally agree 100% with him. Like, what you're trying to do is crazy. There's no way I'm gonna let you do that. So that was a big challenge. And then I would say less than a year into my relationship, where all three of us are living together, we adopted. My husband and I adopted my husband's nephew from Haiti. So that was like a big challenge as well. Like,
Yeah.
and then soon after that, I have my two kids. So I think the transit, like everything happened so quickly in the 5 years, like in the few years, like I felt like our family of two blew up into a family of seven
Yeah. Yeah.
almost instantly. Um, and I think it was hard on my son, a lot harder than I had realized it would be, because I'm very much the like, I roll with the punches. Um, I thought my son was pretty much the same way too, because the way we would travel, the way we like he transitioned fine when we moved into like New Zealand into Paris. Like he was fine. I think he always felt like as long as I'm with mom, I'm good. Like he always seemed to trust me. But when it came to like all these other people, it really encroached on our relationship, I think, in a way that I didn't realize. And um
There's a lot of change for him.
it was a lot of change for him
Yeah.
at once.
Yeah.
And I think he felt like he was losing me more and more, because now my attention was like, for some time
Diverted.
I had to split my attention now. Now I have to like taking care of Diane, my oldest, who's my adopted son, and then taking care of the babies. And then it's like, I wasn't always available in the way that I used to always be available for him.
Yeah. And so that brought you to the co-authoring this book. We finally got to it.
Finally,
Talk to us.
I mean, right.
Talk to
So
us about just what it was like co-authoring the book, um, and kind of what you hope readers take from it, and things like of that nature.
So, like I said, I wrote this book with my son in New Zealand before mommy had a new friend. So, I love to say that this is like a book that kind of brought my life into fruition. Um, and even though it didn't happen in the same way, like I didn't do like a sit down dinner and introduce my son formally to my now husband. Um, I think writing this book with my son helped us prepare for something we didn't know was going to happen to us, right? Because we talked. I remember he really was insistent on the kid's voice, on like make like I don't think a kid this age would say this. Like he really, really was adamant about having the child's voice come through. And to be honest, it's been since the time I wrote it to now, it's been like 7 years since I finally got it published. And it was an uphill battle on so many ways, very challenging. Like first finding the right illustrator took some time. And then um, trying to find it, like trying to get it published traditionally took some time, because that also forced me to pull my book apart. note to other children's book authors or aspiring children's book authors. Unless you are the artist and the writer, publishers only want to see the text. So because I didn't illustrate the book myself, I had to I did it backwards. I had found an illustrator that I loved and connected with, and he brought my book to life. And then I found out that publishers only want my words. I had to decompose that. Now I had to kind of like strip it and just strip it down to words and submit them. Actually, I had to submit them to publishing agents because that's the best, more effective way to get published nowadays is to find an agency, and those agencies have more direct connections to the publishers to get your work published. But that wasn't successful for me either because I think especially in the day and age where social media is so big now, I think a lot of the agents are looking for people they don't have to do a lot of work with. Like if you already have your followers, and you have, you know, some sort of notoriety on social media, they're more likely to get behind you than someone like me who I don't. I'm social media shy.
Yeah.
I'm very social media shy. I'm very outgoing in person, but when it comes to social media, I'm just really shy. So I haven't put a lot of effort behind like growing my audience and stuff like that. So I don't think they saw anything they could take a chance with at that time. So I just moved into self-publishing, and all of this took time because, of course, in between I'm working full time, I'm raising my kids, and while I admit a lot of the fear that I had too, um, allowed me to succumb to these excuses, um, I just knew that I had to get it out there. And I wanted that story to really inspire other single mothers and children. First of all, like really, because I imagine this is being read with a mom and a child. And I imagine this would be the conversation starter for that woman who might have met someone and don't know how to, you know, have that conversation like, oh, I met someone, and, you know, and try to maybe see where their kid is at. So I think it's great for that. I think it could be also a way to manifest that. So maybe you're not dating, or maybe you don't haven't met someone yet, but you want to imagine that moment, and you want to have that conversation with your kid even before that person comes into your life. So maybe that when the person does come, you're already ready, you're prepared. You've had this conversation with your kid, you know kind of what to expect, you kind of get a feeling of where they stand on that. Or maybe you don't think you're ready for a relationship or dating, but I think reading this book might give you hope and inspire you to be open. um, and not only the book but my story, the fact that again at the time I wrote this, I wasn't really actively looking for anyone, but it manifested, and someone that I'm so glad I met and has brought so much light and love to my life. The right kind of love, the kind of love I never knew existed, the kind of love my mother never, my parents' relationships never showed me, that the traumas I carried throughout my life never showed me this. So it's really a book about love and inspiration and the ability to find love again, even though you may have failed at it at one point in your life.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And it's great for blended families and mixed families to have this as a resource,
Right.
you
Or
know.
even like, yeah, it's something to reflect on. Cause I think that's something like me and my family, we love to talk about the beginning.
Yeah.
Like the first time my son came to Novardi, or the first time Diane, for example, our adopted son came to our family. Like these are things, and I know that I'm going to share these stories with my little ones when they get old enough to understand it. You
Yeah.
know, even now for them, it's really interesting to see like my 4-year-olds trying to make sense of like, okay, this is my daddy and this is Mally's daddy. That's Mally's daddy who comes to pick him up every once in a while, you know, every
Yeah.
weekend.
Yeah.
So I think he's trying to, he hasn't quite made the connections yet, but I'm really excited. I think, you know, this is definitely a great book as well to kind of have blended families reflect on their own journey and how they came to be. Because it's it's a wonderful thing. I don't do it often enough, but it's a wonderful thing when you really take a moment and pause and reflect on where you've come from and the journey
Yeah.
that you've gone through, the good and the bad. Um, it's really great. So
Yeah.
it's also a bestseller. Did I tell you that?
Yeah, yeah, the Amazon number 1,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It was number one on Amazon in three
That's
categories. So um, I was shocked about that. So
yeah.
that to me was the full circle because I had been scared for so long
Yeah.
of getting this out. So the fact that I put it out there and it was so well received in its first week was like a huge, huge accomplishment for
Yeah.
me. Really validated that
That's
I needed
incredible.
this, that I needed to share this story.
Yeah.
I've been getting a lot of like great feedback from readers and saying like, yep, exactly, like, um, this is what they've needed. They've been using this to inspire them to date, to want to
Yeah.
date, to have that conversation with their kids as well.
Yeah.
So that's really been great.
Yeah. Uh Karen, we talked about quite a bit
Yeah,
in this time.
yeah.
Um was there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to hit on?
Can't think of anything. I don't know if you had
Okay.
anything, any other questions, but I think we dove into it all.
Yeah. So, before I do my final acknowledgement of you, do you want to just let people know how they can buy your book, and then if they want to get in contact with you or
Yeah.
things of that nature?
So Mommy's New Friend is available on Amazon. It's also available in Barnes and Noble. And even if you just Google, I think even Google offers some sort of sale somehow. But it's out on all major platforms from my understanding. You can also find me at mommysnewfriend.com. That's my website. You can also get a link to buy the book there if you want. And I am on Instagram again as Elga Dora, not by my name, Karyn Glemaud. I'm a little social media shy. So Elga Dora is my moniker online, um, as well as on Facebook. But I'm very much more active on Instagram, whatever that means, because I'm not very active. But if you want to find me, reach out to me on Instagram. I'm very responsive. I love to hear stories or how this book might have helped you, or if you just want to share your story or connect in any way. I hope me sharing my story inspires others to keep living, um, and to just imagine that your life can be whatever you really want it to be in some ways. So
Yeah, Karen, I just want to acknowledge you on what an incredible human being you
thank,
are.
thank you.
Having known you just for a year, I saw, the other, like, a different side of you, and now seeing this um whole story is kind of humbling.
Oh, thank you.
Just because it really just shows you how little we know each other and
Right.
our friends, and how much that we've all overcome, right? And you've been through some tough experiences, and so but I'm thankful that you shared them.
Thank
I hope that it helps anybody going through a similar situation um, heal and
you. Yes.
uh, move forward with their lives, um, and then the second part of your journey of being a single mother, and everything there as well was just incredible. There's a lot of trauma there as well. There's a lot of uh you know back and forth, and what should I do for my son, and what should I do for myself, and there's a lot that you went there, and to see that you now have a great relationship with um your son's father, and things like that. um that's quite incredible. And now, seeing where you are today, just being able to accept new love and have more children, and give hope to anybody that um, is a
That might
single mother and isn't being um, allowing themselves to even date. Maybe, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of single mothers out there that, as you said, might feel like that's selfish and not in their child's interest, when in fact, it's okay to be selfish, and
it's not
things like.
even selfish just to have love, and
Yeah.
like, for me, I'm very proud to be able to show my son the example of love that I didn't have growing up. Like, so my son sees me and my husband dancing around the house and showing affection and saying I love you. Like, I think these are important. These are great opportunities, especially when it works really well. But I also have to say, proceed with caution and be mindful and careful. Because again, I think it's very important to protect our children and make sure that we're bringing the right people into their lives. So take the time that's necessary to vet that person and make sure that they have the best interest for you and your child. Because when it works, it really works well, and it's a beautiful thing to show your kids love, unconditional love, and the importance of that.
Yeah. So, and then now, also publishing a book, which is awesome, and to give, uh, to give a voice to blended families, and um, make them feel whole, with what their lives are, and to have a resource, and to help if with that transition, if people are transitioning. So, thank you so much, Karen, and
Thank
yeah.
you for having me. I love this platform, and I love what you're doing, giving people a chance to share their stories. So thank you, Anna.
I
It's my
appreciate it. Thank
thank
you.